Okay. Hi, my name's Rasmus. I moved to Keizer back in 1992. We lived in Albany before then. Wasn't involved with Keizer Heritage at that point in time, but I'd heard about it when we moved here. I was an owner of American Pacific Title and Escrow Company in Salem. We also had offices throughout the valley and down in Medford. And we'd sold the company and I retired in 1998. And my wife, prior to that, had volunteered over at City Hall for about 7 years at that time. And she heard about the old school and the fact that they were trying to do something with it. As you know, it was moved to this location back in 1996 and just sat here, nothing being done outside of Keizer Heritage trying to raise money through spaghetti feeds and things like that to get money to restore the school. But in 1998, the city kind of put the burden on the Keizer Heritage Foundation to do something with the school, restore it. There were some joking comments by people in the city about just putting a match to it and having a giant weenie roast, but fortunately that didn't happen. So in 1998, with my wife's encouragement, I contacted Keizer Heritage. Holly Erickson was the president at that time, and they had started a committee to look into the restoration. And I remember at that time, Jim Hoopy with Keizer Florist, Les Zeitz was the publisher of the Keizer Times. That's Lyndon's brother, if those of you don't know him. Tom Bauer was involved, Joanne Bilkey, and a few other people on the board at that time. John Jenkins, I remember, and other names are escaping me right now. That was the board of directors and the committee. And they started talking about how to do this. Well, one of the things that became apparent was they needed to have a business plan, because they needed to have the city be involved too. They wanted to get a grant. The city had grants that were used for renovations, restorations of that type of thing, of historic building. And the grants were varied amounts. But at that time, Keizer Heritage knew they're going to have to ask for a couple $100,000 at least from the city. So they need to have a business plan to go to the city. So we sat down and I, with the help of a couple other people, put together a business plan that talked about how to run the building after it was restored. And that involved, obviously, the cost of operations of the building, the typical utilities. We did not have a mortgage or anything like that. The city was generously leasing the land to Keizer Heritage at $100 a year, and the building was owned by Keizer Heritage Foundation. It had been donated by Galen Springer, the developer who developed Keizer, the Schoolhouse Square, as it's called then. So we had to look at all the other expenses and how to come up with income. The city also put the onus on us of having to have nonprofit tenants. So it's not something where we could make money on the building. That wasn't the intent of it. If we wanted to do that, you go out and get people in, realtors or insurance people or that are profit making, and charge them the market rent for the space in the building. But with nonprofits, we had to figure out a way to do that, to have money to operate the building, and also for the future, because we had to have money if we needed a new roof, need to be painted, other things that might need to be done in the building, heating, cooling, all that. So the business plan addressed all those matters and came up with the idea of what we call, in real estate terms anyway, it's called a triple net lease. Now, there was no mortgage involved, so that didn't get involved with the expenses. But all the other expenses, we'd look at what they were for the entire year. Whatever, it could be things even like janitorial service, garbage pickup. Every little expense there was, totaled them together and figured them out by the square foot for the tenants to pay rent. And also included in that was the sinking fund amount, which we had to again do planning in the future of what it's going to cost. A new roof would be $25,000 in 15 years. So we kind of worked that backwards to so many dollars per year we'd have to save. Anyway, it all sounds complicated, and in a way it was, but we took all that information and put it in a package. And in, I think it was February or March of 1999, the board, a few of the officers went to the city council and talked to them about this proposal. Prior to that, of course, there'd been lobbying going on by different board members. And I remember my wife, as she volunteered at City Hall, Ann knew all the city councilors. So when they came to pick up their package for the meetings, she'd say, "Hey, do you have a few minutes?" And she'd sit down and talk with them about the old school. And most of them had never been in it. So some of them she brought over here and gave them a tour of the building, even though it was just a, junked out inside, from being moved over here. But anyway, with her work and the other people that lobbied the city council voted 7-0, which was a rarity in those days, to approve a grant. And the grant amount was $250,000, because we had gone out and done some estimates, not formal bids, but some estimates of what it would cost to restore, and it came in around $500,000 to restore the building. So the city council said, fine, we'll give you a grant for $250,000, but there was one major condition, and that was Keizer Heritage Foundation had to raise the other $250,000 in a 90-day period. That was between March and June of 1999. So at that point, that obviously a lot of pressure, and trying to go out and get grants for that from other organizations was not going to be easy. Most of them have deadlines, and they take 6 months to make a decision and so forth. So we did have, Ann and myself and a couple other people did have some ideas on grants, and we wrote for some of those. But the main onus for getting the money was to go to the community. And there were people, like I mentioned before, Les Seitz with the newspaper, which was great for publicity and all that. Tom Bauer with insurance, and his family was well known in the area. Joanne Bilkey with realtors, Amy McLeod with realtors. And there were many other people that got involved in the fundraising. I remember the realtors had a $99.99, since it was 1999. And that was one of their fundraising goals for each company, to at least do that much. The kids at the school, they wanted to see the school restored, so they got pennies for the school. And of course, hopefully they got more than a few pennies, which they did. And then, of course, there was going to the various people in the community, businesses and people that were more well-to-do, to get them to donate larger sums of money. And in doing that, their names would be placed on the different rooms in the school. They had an idea of a mural that would have people's names on it if they donated more than $300, a variety of things like that. Long story short, they had a meeting, kind of a fundraising meeting in Whitaker School in the gymnasium, and they had the old school bell from Keizer School on the floor out there, and they were going to ring it for people that donated $10,000 or more. And at that time, at that meeting, there had been one person that had come forward before when he heard about that, and walked into Les Zeitz's office and said, "Here's the check for $10,000. And that was Jerry Walker of the Volcanoes. The Volcanoes had just been in town for a couple years, just getting started then, but they wanted to help the community. So he was the first one to kick in $10,000, and then there were 6 other people, and including my wife and I, and Doc Casterline, and some of the others wanted to remain anonymous. I do remember one thing that helped raise funds too was Jim Hoopy, I mentioned before, was on the board. He owned Keizer Florist, and whenever they had holidays, they needed deliveries because they were swamped, Valentine's Day, Christmas, that type of thing. So Keizer Heritage people would volunteer for deliveries and raised money, and Jim donated all the delivery fees that they charged to customers to Keizer Heritage during that time. So over the years, he donated well over that $10,000 amount too. So anyway, we did that. We ended up getting a couple grants for $45,000 and $20,000. The rest of the money came in from people. And when the end of June came around, Keizer Heritage had raised $276,000. So that was great that they met the city's requirement of $250,000. Okay, so by then, we'd raised the money. We'd also gone out, of course, to get formal bids. We had a closing date in June of bids coming in to do the restoration. And the company that ended up winning the bid was Ron Fair, P-H-A-I-R Construction. It was probably Ron's last project before he retired. And of course, they did a lot of donation stuff, and they went out and got subcontractors to donate time and material, even though it still ended up costing close to the $500,000 that was estimated for the total. The foreman on that was somebody by the name of Rich Duncan, which most people know now as Rich Duncan Construction, very well known in the Salem-Keizer area. So Rich was the foreman on it, and of course did a fine job with the restoration. They started in July and they finished in the latter part of November. So it was 5 months for a project that could have taken a lot longer. We ended up putting a handicap lift in the building for people going from the first to the second floor, besides obviously doing the normal restoration. Rich was also careful to leave some historic details, like upstairs on the wall. It showed what the original lath and plaster type wall was underneath the current sheetrock that they put up for the restoration. Similarly, in other parts of the building, we tried to keep it as original as possible. But anyway, in November of 1999, it finished, and the tenants then got the opportunity to move in. Hadn't mentioned before, but the tenants were the Keizer Art Association, and they had been a big help in fundraising too. One of their founding members had donated a lot of money personally to the restoration. Another was the Keizer Community Library, which had been housed in City Hall before. They got a chance to come over here and have their own space. The Keizer Heritage Museum was formed to house all the artifacts and history of the city of Keizer and the surrounding area. And the other tenant at that time was the Keizer Young Life. And they had a small office in the building, but they used the meeting room upstairs for their meetings every Monday and throughout the years. The meeting room I just mentioned was also going to be another source of income. In the business plan, we also talked about that, having a space that could be rented out. Could be rented out for meetings, weddings, whatever kind of event that people had. The nice thing at that time is they also had a patio on the back side of the building. And the patio, they ended up putting benches around the patio with bricks on it. And the bricks, another source of fundraising, had people's names on it. And therefore, there was more money raised to finish up the patio and make the area look nice for events. The meeting room then was about 1,200 square feet, which was a good size for most medium events. And the one thing that was important at that time is we didn't have money to pay somebody to be an event coordinator to handle the renting of the meeting room and contracts. So my wife, Ann, who'd been volunteering at City Hall for 10 years then, or close to at that time, volunteered to become the event coordinator. And she did that for about 14 to 15 years. And it was something that ended up being a great fundraiser for Keizer Heritage Foundation. It also helped the tenants because it kept their rent from increasing a lot, because the money that was made in doing the meeting room was put into the operation fund, the sinking fund, and so forth for Keizer Heritage. All this time, nobody had been paid, no None of the volunteers, none of the board, none of the event coordinators, that type of thing. And of course, Keizer Art and the library and Young Life were volunteer organizations also. What was surprising about this whole project, I think probably the main surprise to me, since I was relatively new to Keizer at that time, I'd just been here 6 years, I didn't realize what the school meant to a lot of people in the community. It had been the only meeting place, when the city of Keizer wasn't even a city back then, didn't become a city until 1982. Back then it was a meeting place. So they had PTA meetings, Christmas parties, whatever, any kind of thing that involved the local community was part of the city of Keizer. The people got together and they met at the school because it was the only large enough meeting place for those type of getting together functions. So that was interesting that the city and the people in the city had such a memory for it. The other thing then, and this kind of leads into that, was when we did the fundraising, pretty much having to raise $250,000 in 90 days in a small city is almost impossible. And that's where what surprised me was how much the city came together to do all that, whether it's the businesses, the realtors, the students, the families, and so forth. It was just great to see that type of thing happen. Also, from my own personal involvement, as I mentioned, I'd written the business plan that we took to the city council and put into effect then to run the building. During the construction and prior to that, there were two of us, Jim Hoopy and myself, that were involved as co-project managers, or whatever term you want to use, both volunteering, of course, helping get the area cleared for the parking lot, which used to be on the west side of the building, not on the east side like it is now. Clearing all that out, we got the Oregon National Guard involved, coming out and doing some project to help level it and clean some things out. Local contractors volunteered their time to do that too. So Jim and I spent most days down here for several hours coordinating things for that. Once the restoration started with Ron Fair Construction and Rich Duncan spearheading it, we were down here again on a daily basis, just checking in with them, finding out what they needed and so forth. Once the restoration was done, then I had volunteered to become the building manager / business manager for the foundation and running the building. Since I'd done the business plan, I knew what needed to be done and so forth. So at that point in time, the tenants came in, we got them all situated. And as I mentioned, Ann came in as the event coordinator for renting out the meeting space and patio of the building. And all that, we set up an accounting process through Quicken, it was called back then, and QuickBooks now, still being used as far as I know. Set everything up to do the budgets, the planning, the projections for the next year, et cetera. One of the main things that happened each year was every January we looked at the previous year's expenses and made estimates from what they were to the next year so we could determine what to charge the tenants for rent. And I always laugh, it's kind of one of the surprises too. I think it was the second year or something like that, or third year, when I did the estimate, and then at the end of the year, when we came up with the total, I was off by $11, which is never was anywhere close to that before or after that. But that was what I did for about 18 years, a volunteer business manager and building manager. Okay. One thing I forgot to mention when we were talking about tenants, and obviously a very important one, they hadn't been here for so long, I forgot about them, was the Chamber of Commerce was one of the first tenants in the building too. And of course the Chamber was instrumental in getting the fundraising too, with all their members and so forth, the business and stuff in the Keizer area. So Christine Becker and her people did a great job in helping out with that. and the chamber came in and rented the space too. So that gave us an ongoing presence in the building, where the library is only open certain days, certain hours. Keizer Art, same thing. Museum, same thing. But the chamber was here for basically a business day, 9 to 5 every day, except for Saturdays and Sundays. So that was a good process in having the chamber come in and be a part of that. I know one of the things that's kind of interesting, when the museum first started, we needed storage and all that. So we found a couple places that had old glass glass display cabinets. But also, Ann and I went up to Portland to, I can't remember the name of the company now, it's under the Burnside Bridge down on the east side. But we went up there and we got like the display cases that are in the museum that have, they're kind of slanted with the wood that pulls up. We found those up there and bought them and had them shipped down and displayed down here for the museum, and traveled around trying to find those type of things to get the museum to have space for displays. And that's why even today, it's kind of a hodgepodge of equipment or storage or display cases and so forth. Because of that reason, we just had to find what we could to display what came from the people of the city of Keizer.